So our next presenter is Laura Fehlberg. Laura is originally from Florida, received her bachelor's degree from University of Florida with a focus on equine management. You don't always hear that at a dairy conference, so that's pretty exciting. She received her master's degree in equine nutrition in 2018 and is currently a PhD student at University of Illinois, working on transition cow research involving amino acid supplementation. So presenting today on rumen-protected lysine prior to calving aids in early lactation performance is Laura Fehlberg from the University of Illinois.
Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Borman. And I'd like to go ahead and jump into the background. And so the transition period I would like to start with, it consists of 3 weeks prior to calving until 3 weeks after calving and is pretty well known as a high stress situation. And during this time, there's increased management and there's a negative energy and protein balance due to a decrease in dry matter intake and the onset of milk synthesis. And so Bell in 2000 actually characterized this negative metabolizable protein balance as occurring at calving all the way through about 21 days in milk. And so I would like to note that it's not adequate just to look at crude protein content. And so just by increasing the crude protein, we don't know exactly what's going on with the actual protein quality. And so now we kind of need to switch to metabolizable protein and looking at those amino acids that are in the diet. And most notably, lysine and methionine are going to be limited, particularly for milk yield. And by increasing those limiting amino acids, where the cow's actually able to then utilize the indispensable and dispensable amino acids at a greater rate. And so in particular, if we're talking about lysine, if we provide cows with a rumen-protected source of lysine that can bypass the rumen and go directly to the small intestine. And particularly, this allows the cow to access this lysine without having rumen microbes benefit from it. Additionally, lysine is going to be a group 2 amino acid, and therefore it will bypass any hepatic tissue and go directly to the mammary gland. Once in the mammary gland, lysine can be utilized as itself or transaminated into branched chain amino acids or dispensable amino acids. And this increases the pool of usable amino acids. These can then be used for either maintenance or prepartum for the fetus, uterus, or clostrogenesis, or postpartum for lactogenesis. And so now when we look at, there's many sources of lysine in ingredients today. However, traditional corn soy diets are going to be particularly low in lysine. Blood meal, though, is a viable option to provide rumen undegradable lysine. However, work from Stein and others at the University of Illinois indicated that the digestibility of lysine in blood meal can be variable depending on the amount of heat utilized in the process, and increasing heat can actually decrease the digestibility of lysine. Additionally, Ross and others at Cornell University stated that we can't determine the digestibility of the protein in blood meal based just on the color. For example, a darker blood meal doesn't necessarily indicate that it has a lower digestibility. And so because of this, it would be advantageous for dairy producers to be able to provide rumen-protected amino acids because we can provide it at a constant rate, and that's easy to change based on the lysine content of the diet. And so some previous research, particularly looking at rumen-protected lysine and methionine, noted that there was increased milk and milk protein yields when these rumen-protected amino acids were provided, particularly during the transition period and notably during early lactation. However, one problem noted with a lot of the earlier research is that these amino acids were continuously fed prepartum through postpartum. And so there's no way to determine the best time period, whether it be prepartum, postpartum, or during the transition period, to feed rumen-protected amino acids, particularly lysine and methionine. And so because of that, we decided to conduct a research study in which we fed rumen-protected lysine either prepartum, postpartum, or both. And so quickly, I'd just like to note our treatments in which pre indicates prepartum, post indicates postpartum, C indicates control or no rumen-protected lysine, and L indicates cows that consumed rumen-protected lysine. And so there's a lot on this slide, but I'd like to highlight the crude protein percentages around 14 to 16%. And also that in our starch content, we wanted to only have a small increase in starch from prepartum to postpartum and kept our starch content moderate during the postpartum period to make sure to decrease the likelihood of metabolic disorders, which could impact our results. Additionally, cows that consumed rumen-protected lysine consumed this as a top dress on the TMR at either 0.54% of the dry matter intake prepartum or 0.4% of dry matter intake postpartum. And additionally, we calculated the intestinally available metabolizable protein, lysine, and methionine using AMTS. And notably on this slide, I'd like to point out that intestinally available lysine was greater for cows that consume rumen-protected lysine prepartum and postpartum, as would be expected. And so now I'd like to jump into the results in which rumen-protected lysine increased body weight for the last 2 weeks prior to calving. And though this may not have a large amount of biological significance because there was no difference in body weight change during this time period, this body weight increase actually did carry over to the postpartum period too. This may also be due to the tendency for an increase in dry matter intake postpartum when cows consumed rumen-protected lysine prepartum, as indicated by these orange lines, which are going to indicate cows that consumed rumen-protected lysine. Additionally, body condition score was also greater postpartum when cows consumed lysine postpartum. And we hypothesized that this may be due to the combination of lysine and methionine increasing carnitine in the liver, which is utilized for beta oxidation, and an increase in carnitine may result in a more efficient beta oxidation and therefore increased energy for the cow. Additionally, rumen-protected lysine provided prepartum increased energy-corrected milk, fat-corrected milk, and milk composition yields during the postpartum period, as again indicated by that orange line. And so this is actually different from a recent research study that had a very similar study design to ours, in which they fed rumen-protected lysine and rumen-protected methionine prepartum, postpartum, or both. And they actually saw no changes in dry matter intake, milk yield, or energy-corrected milk yield, which clearly was different from what we saw in our study. And we think that this may be due to differences in diet. And so they had a greater content of starch postpartum, which may have increased metabolic disorders, and that could alter the results. Additionally, we had greater amounts of metabolizable protein, lysine, and methionine provided to the cow prepartum. And though Lee and others did use NRC to calculate their protein yields, and we used AMTS, we don't think that these differences are large enough to amount to the differences that we see here on this table. And so for that reason, I would like to emphasize that it's not just feeding a rumen-protected lysine product. We need to understand the digestibility and how much is actually absorbed for the cow in that product, and also how much metabolizable protein the diet begins with, and then make sure that the cow is consuming a TMR that allows her to optimize production. And then lastly, when we fed rumen-protected lysine prepartum, there was a tendency to decrease preformed fatty acids and increase milk fatty acids in milk. And this likely indicates that cows that were consuming rumen-protected lysine did not have to use as many body stores and mobilize those body stores to make milk fatty acids, and were actually able to do it from the nutrients that they were consuming. This is further emphasized by a decrease in beta-hydroxybutyrate at 7 days postpartum, or 7 days postpartum when rumen-protected lysine was consumed prepartum, emphasizing that cows were not having to mobilize. Additionally, one common question has to do with the economics and whether it is actually feasible to feed any kind of supplement. And so we looked at the income over feed cost relative to cows that consume rumen-protected lysine compared to those that did not. And we actually saw that the greatest savings occurred when cows were fed rumen-protected lysine prepartum compared to the control. And there was actually a savings of $2.53. And so overall, the take-home message of this is that there was when we fed rumen-protected lysine, we had increased usable amino acids, which led to a decrease in lipolysis, and that indicated an increase in milk component yields and overall elevated lactation performance, and it was economically efficient. And with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you for that presentation. We do have a question. What do you propose is the mechanism of action for prepartum rumen-protected lysine on milk production? So what is causing that increase in milk production that you saw?
So we are thinking on that, and this is just a hypothesis, but that we essentially primed the mammary gland for milk production. And so these cows maybe required more for clostrigenesis, and then we see the most benefits at that first week or two prepartum. And so we think that the cows were limited in lysine prepartum, and that by providing it, we prime the mammary gland and able to perform at its best, especially right at the beginning of lactation.
Okay, thank you. And then University of Illinois has done a number of studies with rumen-protected methionine and seeing benefits there. The last study you showed was that combination, but I guess, what are your next steps? Are you thinking of doing a combination of rumen-protected lysine and methionine, or
Well,
there?
So interestingly for mine, we changed the rumen-protected lysine amount and inclusion level. However, we also had rumen-protected methionine. And so we basically wanted to start the cows out as successful as they could be. So they had rumen-protected methionine in their diets already. And then we just increased the amount of rumen-protected lysine. And I think that it shows that it's really about the balance of amino acids, having the correct balance, and making sure that the cows aren't limited.